Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thanks for spending some time with me. We are only 3 weeks into the second Trump administration, but I think I can already confidently say that we are no longer, I don't think he's any longer deserving of the benefit of the doubt on his intentions and how he's going to run this administration. I don't think it took very long. I was willing to wait and see, let the facts shake out, but I believe that Trump has proven with his actions, not just his words, that he doesn't care about the rule of law or the Constitution. He doesn't care about the American people, especially the working class that he claims to represent in this past election. And he doesn't care about our allies. So I'm going to talk about the specific examples of his actions that I believe really cannot be supported by conservatives unless they're willing to concede that they also do not care about the Constitution, the rule of law, Americans, or our allies in the world. And if that's true, that Americans desire this illiberalism that they're getting with Trump, what does that mean for the future of our country? So that's what we're going to talk about today. This has been somewhat interesting to deal with because to let you in on my thought process a little bit. I went into this administration with, I want to be honest with people because what I feel like in the media so often, what is going on. And by the way, when I say the media, I'm not just talking about Fox News and CNN and the big boys. Okay. I'm talking about on YouTube. I'm talking about in podcasts. I'm talking about kind of across the way the media landscape is changing. And there's more weight now on individual creators like myself or people that have left New York Times, Washington Post, and started their own Substacks. Like there's more of this democratization of media. And some of that is really good. I think that some of the gatekeeping that was happening at the legacy media institutions were not allowing stories that should have come out to come out. And I think that that is certainly, there's guilt of that on the left. You could look at the Joe Biden sort of age cover-up that they tried to do. Of course, it didn't work. I think it should be noted that it didn't work. They tried to tell us that Joe Biden wasn't too old to serve as the president or to run again. And just like, don't believe your lying eyes. It's deep fake stuff. I mean, they made every excuse in the book. And then that June 27th debate, there was just no doubt about it. They could not possibly spin it a different way. So they had to move a different direction. So I'm not just talking about that legacy media that tends to be more left-leaning and is therefore, not on my side necessarily, but it's happening on the right too, because now what you have is basically there's only two kinds of media that you're going to find for the most part. There are exceptions, obviously, but the loudest voices are either always defending Donald Trump no matter what he does, and sometimes lying about what he's doing because they can't justify the bad things, so they just don't talk about them. And vice versa. There's another side of that just says everything Trump does is hair on fire, the end of democracy. And they also, instead of just pointing out the things that are true, that are bad that he's done, they exaggerate things. And so they lie. So you end up with people that are paying attention to one of these sides or the other, and they're only hearing part of the information. I refuse to do that. I just won't do it. I will not get on here and lie to you to protect some politician because they work for us. We don't work for them. This is not a team sport. This is not, as Nick Catoggio put it this week, referencing Jerry Seinfeld's bit, rooting for laundry, which if you don't know about that bit, that is a thing Jerry Seinfeld came up with a long time ago. He's basically saying how we cheer for sports teams. It doesn't make a lot of sense because the players change, the coaches change, the management change. Like everything changes about this except the uniform. A player will leave one team. We will cheer for him when he's on our team. He'll get traded. He'll at another team. Now we boo him. It's because he's in the wrong laundry. So we're essentially just cheering for laundry in the end. And that's kind of what it feels like we're at with politics now, is that if you're a Republican and Trump's on your team, you defend him no matter what. You cheer for him no matter what, and you don't call out the nonsense, and you don't call out the illegal stuff or the stuff that scares you, the stuff that you think is illegal. And if you're on the other team, everything's bad about the other team. We can say nothing good about them ever. We can say nothing is well-motivated. And I just don't want to do it because honestly, it would be too exhausting to try to bring up. But what I find in my conversations with people, and this is both in sort of podcast land and YouTube land, as well as just with regular people in real life, is that often when I bring up points that might have been laid out by the other team. So for example, we'll get into some of this, but in Trump's, let's just say the Ukraine stuff, which we're going to talk about in a little bit when we talk about allies. I was having a conversation about the Ukraine situation the other day with someone on their podcast. and I brought up several points that he had never heard before. And these are not incredibly nuanced points that I found from some obscure article and only one person had ever said it. These are the broad brushstrokes of what people would have said that supporting Ukraine, essentially, and some of the points, some of the counterpoints to the Russian propaganda stuff that MAGA has latched onto. He had never heard them. And this was like not a dumb guy. It's not some willful, he's certainly not someone that I would say is super Trumpy or something. Probably someone that voted for sort of hold the nose kind of thing in November, or I like this guy more than I like Kamala Harris. That kind of voter. But the media he consumes, I assume, he's just never run across any of these arguments. Same thing happens when I talk to people on the left. They've never heard any of these potential arguments against their positions. And I just think we're better off if you hear kind of all the different sides and then make a decision for yourself what you think is more credible. And so I'm going to do that. That being said, I went into this Trump administration thinking, all right, I'm going to give him a shot, because there was a lot that got said in the first administration that, he was going to weaponize the Department of Justice. He was going to go after his political enemies. He was going to do X, Y, and Z. He was going to end democracy. There were going to be no more elections. And, a lot of that stuff ended up being absolutely nonsense. It didn't happen. And so I think it was fair to go into this second administration with a similar mentality of, I know he has a lot of tendencies. I know he has a lot of authoritarian desires, but maybe his cabinet will rein him in. Maybe the people around him, maybe chief of staff, these people will convince him there's a better way to do this stuff. And sometimes his political impulse is correct, but the way he goes about it isn't right. So for example, I think people are really sick of government waste. I don't think they want their tax dollars going to things that they don't feel like benefit regular Americans. And so some of this DOGE stuff is absolutely right as far as people are cheering it on, because they're like, yes, we would love you to look under the hood. Tell us where you think there's waste and fraud and things going to things that we don't believe as Americans we should be supporting. And let's look under the hood. I think that's fine. So he taps into that, but sometimes he goes about it the wrong way, which will cause problems, I think, for him. And so the three things I want to cover specifically, and the ways that we've shown he doesn't care about the rule of law, is the first thing. Let's talk about that. Rule of law and the Constitution. The big complaint in the Biden years was that Biden weaponized the Department of Justice to go after Donald Trump. And I think that is a pretty fair assessment in some ways, for a couple of reasons. I'm not going to dwell on this for a very long time, but I know this isn't Biden's, but the New York case, I've said before, is ridiculous. The Alvin Bragg brought case, that's the 35 felony charges that Donald Trump was convicted of, were bogus. It was novel law theory that had never been used on anyone else. It was definitely an example of Alvin Bragg deciding that man, Donald Trump, we want to find a way to prosecute, and then bending the law around that so that you can get that guy. And that is an incredibly corrupt and should worry everyone in America about the justice system, when you can pick the person and then bend the crime around that. And so that case bothered me. I don't feel like that was the case with all the federal stuff, but it was close enough, and there were enough ties with Biden, and there was enough foolish things going on with the way they tried to make Jack Smith independent of the Justice Department, but then not really. It was a lot of stuff where I think that if it were not Donald Trump, the methods and the charges would not have been brought the same way. Now, I still think what Donald Trump was illegal when it came to the documents. I think what he did was illegal when he tried to steal the election. I just don't think the Department of Justice did what their job is, which is to be completely fair, nonpartisan, don't go after political enemies, and don't bend the rules because it's Donald Trump, for good or for bad, okay? I think those are fair assessments of what the Biden DOJ did. And certainly once you look at the treatment of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's pardons of his entire family, those are the ultimate corruption of, I think, the pardon power. And with Hunter Biden specifically, there was definitely some corruption going on there with the Department of Justice in the original plea deal that they tried to give him. And that was basically a plea deal that said, hey, yeah, we kind of admit to this, and then you can't charge us for any other crimes that he committed. And the judge said, no, that's not how this works. This is not a pardon. And so that's why he got convicted of those tax crimes and the gun crimes. Now, and then he gets pardoned anyway in the end. So to me, the weaponization that Trump was talking about with Biden specifically it was weaponization against him. That was really the problem that everyone had, and I think that some of that is fair. Donald Trump has flipped that around, and it's less about, right now, so far, 3 weeks in only, remember, we're very short into this administration, but so far it's not that he's going after his enemies, it's that he's protecting his friends. And New York City Mayor Eric Adams, if you do not know, was charged with bribery and corruption and campaign finance problems by the Southern District of New York. So this was last year that he was indicted on this stuff. They have a trial set for early this year because they're trying to get this trial out the door before he's up for re-election in November of this year, 2025. And so this is all agreed upon by all the parties. They want to get this trial out of the way so that the voters can decide based on the trial already having been done, because there are Justice Department rules that say you can't do a trial within 60 days of an election, because then the DOJ could just try to try to jam up someone in court, even if they don't think the charges are legitimate. And so there's a rule for that, but, not for a year out. The charges were brought over 400 days before the New York City mayor election is. So there's plenty of time. So Donald Trump we assume this is what happened. Eric Adams met with Donald Trump. Eric Adams has been more friendly to Donald Trump ever since these indictments came down, and he's been kind of drowning in his bad approval ratings in New York City. And so he's basically saying, I will help you deport. I'll follow your immigration and deportation rules, and I'll help you enforce those in New York. And the quid pro quo is you get me off these charges. Well, Donald Trump says, ready, fire, aim, and then sends his Department of Justice to try to make this look legal. And the problem is that it's very much not. There's a lot of problems here. So I know this is getting into some wonkiness, but I think it's important to know a few of these details, okay? I would suggest reading more by Andy McCarthy at National Review. He's got a 7-part series right now. He's on, I think, number 4 today. And essentially, Andy McCarthy was a U.S. attorney at the Southern District of New York for 20 years or something. So this is someone that has a very specific knowledge of how this stuff works in the Justice Department, because he used to have that job. So I like to look to those kind of people that did. Let's talk to air traffic controllers when we're talking about air traffic control problems. Let's talk to people that are U.S. attorneys when we're talking about U.S. attorney problems. It makes sense to me, right? Read them. So it's really good stuff. But the short condensed version that's not 7 articles long is that Donald Trump, I guess, decides this. Department of Justice, in fact, this is the interim deputy attorney general, which is a guy named Beauvais, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And this was Trump's trial lawyer, one of Trump's trial lawyers for the New York case. So this is a Trump lawyer that is interim in the Department of Justice specifically to the attorney general, but while they're waiting to confirm the real pick for that job, because this happens all the time. And so you fill the administration with temporary positions while you wait for Senate confirmations on your real pick. So you've got someone in that job for a few weeks or maybe a couple months before the real person comes in. The assistant attorney general or deputy attorney general sends this memorandum to SDNY and says, we want you to dismiss these charges. And the reason we want you to dismiss the charges is because A, this is a political prosecution. B, it hinders the mayor from doing his job and helping us enforce immigration law. That was basically the reason why. He also goes on to say, hey, by the way, this is not a reflection on anyone that works at SDNY, and we're not saying any of them did a poor job, or we're not saying, and by the way, we're also not saying we did not look at the evidence of this case to see if it was worthwhile. So they didn't look at the evidence, they didn't look at the case at all, but they know it's politically motivated. Tell me how that makes sense, first of all. Secondly, how can you say that it's politically motivated, but the people that worked on the case that started in 2021, when Eric Adams was certainly not vilifying Joe Biden for any of this migration problems, that's when the investigation started. So you're saying that it is a political prosecution, but none of the people that worked on it were guilty of abusing their powers and politically prosecuting someone. You can understand why this would cause a problem, because what attorney is going to want to go in front of a judge where a trial's already set and say, hey, we want to dismiss these charges, and the judge is going to say why, and they're going to have to say, I don't know, what are they going to say? Are they going to say that they don't have the evidence, they don't think they have a good case? Because apparently that's not the case. In fact, the U.S. attorney resigned from SDNY. When she got this memorandum, she wrote an 8-page thing, also worth reading, and points out that, no, I've looked at this case, everything's why. And this is a Trump appointee. This is the person that is the interim U.S. attorney at SDNY, because while they wait for the real pick to be confirmed by the Senate. So this is a Trump pick. This is not some Biden holdover. This is someone that Trump put there on January 20th and has been there for like 3 weeks, right? And she goes, no, I'm going to resign instead. I'm not going to follow this order because I think that it's wrong. I think it's politically motivated. We were not politically motivated in the prosecution, but this dismissal of the case is politically motivated. And here's the other specific thing that you need to know. A few people resigned at SDNY. A few people resigned at the main justice at the Department of Justice, because they also tried to get them to dismiss it, and they said, no way. And so a lot of people have resigned over this. And The biggest problem with it is that let's just say we believe Trump and his people that this was a politically motivated prosecution of Eric Adams. Let's just say that's the case. The dismissal, the memorandum, was to dismiss without prejudice, not with prejudice. And the difference there legally is without prejudice means that the DOJ can pick this up again. Generally, that would happen if there was some sort of problem with evidence on the case, or they didn't think they could go to trial and win. And so they're like, we're going to dismiss the case right now, but we might pick it up later when we get more evidence, for example. When you say you dismiss something with prejudice, you're saying, no, this was unfair, or the DOJ was in the wrong, and therefore to protect the rights of the citizen, we are saying they cannot pick this case up again. It's sort of like double jeopardy in a way. It's not exactly a not guilty plea, but it is the Department of Justice. It is the executive branch saying, we are dropping this case and future DOJs cannot pick up this case with this evidence later on, okay? They dismissed Eric Adams without prejudice, meaning they can pick it back up, which means, therefore, that Trump, if Eric Adams does not go along or play nicely, the threat is there to bring this investigation back up and throw him in jail. That is political quid pro quo. That is corruption. It is simultaneously the worst parts of both Biden's DOJ corruption and Trump's DOJ corruption, in that it's protecting a friend. And by the way, this is not the only thing we've seen. Apparently, Trump is working on getting the Tate brothers back from Romania, where they are facing human trafficking charges. So we're apparently just all fine with this thing. As long as you support me and as long as you are on my side, we will make sure that nothing bad happens to you. And specifically, the quote that absolutely drives me crazy and should scare all of us, in my opinion, is Trump suggesting on social media this week. In fact, we will go to the Safari thing. Okay, so Trump suggests no law is broken if he's saving his country. He tweeted or put it on Truth Social. He who saves his country does not violate any law. Now, there's a couple ways that people can think about this. You can think that he's talking about himself here. And so he's saying, nothing I do is above the law. I can do anything I want to if I'm saving the country. Or you can think of this as, if you do anything that I determine is saving the country, you are not violating any laws. We will make sure that the Department of Justice does not go after you if it's a federal crime, or if worst case, we'll use the pardon power like we did for January 6th. This is clearly corrupt, and this is clearly not constitutional, and this is clearly not, you can't run on being the law and order president and then pick and choose where the law and order gets applied. He accused Joe Biden of being involved in the Department of Justice, their charges against him and their investigations, and being too close to that. Biden was always trying to pretend he wasn't. I think he was too close to it sometimes. And now Donald Trump is fully embracing the fact that he can just tell the DOJ what to do and that they should follow him because Eric Adams played nice enough. He's on our team now. He's getting the dismissal of these charges, but I want to use it as a leash against him. So it's the worst. It's the worst of both worlds. He's simultaneously threatening legal, well, to be fair, legitimate legal things. I mean, I think that it does appear by the indictment that Eric Adams, again, innocent until proven guilty. But the charges are damning, that he took money from a foreign power and took illegal campaign financing from foreign countries. And that's a problem. We say that this problem, that kind of corruption is not okay. And we say it's illegal. And this is not something that no one gets charged with. This is not the Alvin Bragg situation where they're going after Trump with a law that they've never charged anyone else with. They've never tried a novel theory like they have before. Lots of people go down for corruption. In fact, the SDNY specifically goes after people for bribery a lot of times. They were the office that went after, and corruption and fraud too. So Sam Bankman-Fried, that's SDNY. Senator Bob Menendez, that's SDNY. So this is something that this office does specifically. This is not novel to Eric Adams. He's not the first person that's been charged with these bribery or illegal contribution things, okay? So that example alone is enough for me to go, it is very clear that he's putting his money where his mouth is, and there's a different level of justice for his friends than there is for everyone else. Now, we have not seen him go after someone legally yet, although the threats were there in the response, because this U.S. attorney resigns. In her scathing letter, she says, you all are the ones, the DOJ is the one that's politically acting here, not us. And in the response to that, they start threatening, well, we're going to investigate you. We're going to investigate everyone at SDNY. We're going to start investigating all the people that were involved in this to see if they've done anything illegal here. So again, it's starting to be this little threat. We haven't seen the actions on that yet. And so I think it is worth waiting and not judging everything just by words. I think we have to look at actions. But I think the combination of Donald Trump saying he who saves his country does not violate any law, and basically giving himself and any of his followers, any of his minions, permission to do anything that he can then pardon later or just make sure his DOJ doesn't go after. That is dangerous, and that's not the rule of law, and it's not constitutional. Period. End of story. So I think this is a big deal. I don't think it's getting enough attention, and it's the very first of many. I don't think it will be the last abuse of the Department of Justice that we're going to see from him. And so I'm putting my foot down right now and saying, this is already too much. We don't need to wait for some other thing. This is enough to say someone has to be able to stand up to him. It should be Congress, but I'm not confident it will be Congress. It should be the courts in some case, although the courts can certainly overstep their bounds too and have. And the thing to keep in mind about the Constitution is that it's very clear about who has what powers and who has which powers, who has checks on those. You know, we always hear about checks and balances, but they are appropriate. It's like, yes, the courts can say if an action is illegal or legal, but they cannot force the president to do things that he has the right to not do as the executive branch. So they can't force the DOJ to take the Eric Adams case to trial. Now, they can say you have to give us a better reason, and maybe you can't give it without prejudice, and you have to do it with prejudice so that we make sure we're protecting Eric Adams' rights as a citizen of the United States, and that you're not holding over like a threat of legal action so that you get a favor from him. That would be politically corrupt. The courts might not allow that, but they can't force the Trump DOJ to bring charges against someone. That's not the court's job. So everyone has these constitutional constraints. And what I don't like is that the left is asking the courts to overstep their bounds, and the right is cheering on Trump's overstepping of the executive branch's bounds. And I think both can be wrong at the exact same time. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. It doesn't matter if the motivation is to save your country. It doesn't matter because the left is thinking the same thing. They're pretending that this is existential and that the courts have to do illegal things potentially to stop Trump from doing illegal things. And that's how we got here in the first place. We keep trying to excuse illegal or unconstitutional action to stop someone else from doing something that's illegal or unconstitutional. This is not how we should do it. Got to work within the system. I realize not a lot of people want to do that, okay? So that's example number one. We've got Eric Adams' dismissal of charges, I think is pretty well, obviously, a corrupt situation. Problem number two is he doesn't care about the American people. Look, frankly, everything that's happened in the first 3 weeks, it's been, as most people have aptly compared it to, is like drinking out of a fire hydrant. It's been nonstop. It's been a ton of executive orders. It has been, we saw video of deportations. We saw Dr. Phil jumping in on some of the raids and stuff. And so it's been kind of weird, right? But it's been a flurry of activity. My question has been, and I don't think I think the mainstream sort of liberal media has not done a good job at covering this either. My question is Kevin Williamson put it well at the Dispatch. He said, where's the omelet? The famous saying is, if you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And Trump and Elon Musk and DOGE and sort of the administration would say, we're breaking eggs right now. You have to break some eggs to make an omelet. Kevin's point is, where's the omelet? And my point is, where's what's helping the American people, specifically the people that elected him, that said, we care about the economy, we care about prices, we care about inflation, we care about immigration and the border. What are the things you're actually doing to make those people's lives better? And there's a few reasons that I would say that he doesn't care, is because, I'm not the only one that thinks this, but so there's several things. So the first thing is the David Brooks opinion column on New York Times that I think is worth taking a look at, called "Can We Please Stop Calling These People Populist?" So the whole thing about populism is that the populists that support Donald Trump are anti-elite. They think that there's a two-tier justice system here where the elite get different justice than people. The rich get treated differently in the tax code, in all sorts of ways that regular people don't. There's a huge chasm of a divide between college-educated people and uncollege-educated people. And specifically, he goes over some of these chasms. So he says, over the past 20 years or so, many of us social observer types, have been writing about the horrific chasms separating the educated class from the working class. Some of those chasms involve basic health outcomes. People without college degrees die about 8 years sooner than people with 4-year degrees. Some of the chasms involve family structure. Women with only a high school diploma or less are about 5 times as likely to have children out of wedlock as women with a college degree. Some of the chasms are sociological. People with only high school diplomas or less are much more likely to say they have no close friends. They are more likely to live in towns where social capital is collapsing and the young are fleeing. So he goes over all these sort of things. And there was obviously quite a few of these people in the last election and previous elections have sort of been uprising. I think a lot of this started in 2010 with the Tea Party, sort of morphed when Donald Trump came on the scene in 2016. I think COVID and Black Lives Matter and all sorts of things had a lot of things to do with this. So he goes on to say, if America elected a populist as president, you would expect him to devote his administration to addressing these inequities, to boosting the destinies of working class Americans. But that's not what President Trump is doing. He seems to have no plans to narrow the education chasms, no plans to narrow the health outcome chasms or the family structure chasms. Caveat to that, I would say that the appearance of the RFK Jr. nomination to HHS is certainly saying let's make America healthy again. But again, where are the plans? Like what are we actually doing to narrow that 8-year gap between non-college educated and college educated death rates? Okay. No plans to narrow the health outcomes. He has basically no plans to revive the communities that have been decimated by post-industrialization. Why is that? The simplest answer is that Trump really seems not to give a crap about the working class. Trump is not a populist. He campaigns as a populist, but once he has power, he is the betrayer of populism. And I think that is correct. I think this should upset the people that said, we don't like the way the government's been working. We think the government works well for people that are well-connected, elite, college-educated. We think it's not working for the rest of Americans. And Donald Trump is continuing that same pattern so far 3 weeks into this administration, because none of this stuff is helping those people, in my opinion. The DOGE stuff and going after USAID is a really easy way to say, we're gonna nail the libs on this. We're gonna get liberal tears out of this. We're gonna DEI, wokeism, like those are our enemies, and we're gonna root all of them out. But and if that's the goal, okay. There's a lot of people that voted for Trump that also believe in that. There's people like me that think that yes, the executive branch needs to look under the hood of all these agencies and really see where the money's going and really expose this stuff to some sunlight. I'm all for that. But going after USAID, which is less than 1% of the budget, and also only affects people. Mostly affects people outside of America. The whole point of the USAID stuff is that it's money that funnels out of America to foreign investments. It's less than 1% of the budget. So it's not solving the debt. It's not solving the deficit. It's not de-inflationary. It's not even going to help with inflation at all because it's such a tiny, tiny little bit, but it's a bunch of culture war wins for Donald Trump. And that's why they're doing it. And this is all performative, all of it. This is not helping Americans. I'm not saying it's not an okay way you could go after USAID. That's fine. You just also need to be going after, like, if you really want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, let's look at the Pentagon. Let's look at domestic spending. Let's look at Social Security. Let's look at, and DOGE is looking at those stuff, and it's too early to know what they found there. But my point is nothing so far has actually helped the working class. Nothing, in my opinion. And if you disagree with that, shoot me an email, Blake at The Homeless Conservative, or hit it in the comments below. You know, I think this is a good thing. And I think that he goes on to say in this, I think it was in this article, it might be actually a different one, that he talks about how really this is just elite people from each side going to war with each other in the federal government. This is basically really like higher class, economically well off, well educated people on the left and the right fighting with each other and at the expense of everyone else. So the massive layoffs and stuff that are going on in the federal government right now, they're burning it down before they have a plan to build it back up. And it's going to hurt real Americans. I mean, this is already happening where people are either not getting checks or, for example, there was a story yesterday, which I realize these are anecdotal and it's just one story, but it's like a guy that was a 20-year Army veteran. He works for the VA and he just got a notice in his email box that was like, you're fired for performance reasons. And his boss didn't understand it. This makes no sense to me. So this is a guy that is like given his life to work not only in the Army, but then work with veterans of our military. This is a guy that's job, and he just gets fired. And who knows why? But like, we need that's certainly within the president's power. The president can fire anyone in the executive branch. Constitutionally, I believe he can do that. That doesn't mean it's a good thing to fire the guy that works at the VA for no cause. I don't know that that's a good thing. And this is going to start trickling down to our veterans. If they don't have people that help them with the VA stuff, it's going to work. Some of these people are just good people that work for the government and have done what they have been asked. Speaking of that, one thing that I think is pretty clear that he doesn't care about the people that actually want to help him are the attacks this week on Christian charities that have been helping with basically take care of migrant children specifically and refugees. So This is another example where what they do is they say, well, immigration's the hot button issue and we want to do X, Y, and Z. And so we've got to find an enemy all the time with this. And so it's DEI, it's woke people, it's the left. And at some point you either run out of enemies or you just have to keep making up enemies. And so the enemy this week for MAGA is Christian charities that have been taking care of migrants and refugees, specifically minor children migrants specifically. They've become public enemy number one this week. They may be doing illegal things they've been accused of. They've been accused of being corrupt. They've been accused of making money off of this crisis and causing the crisis. What they conveniently leave out, and this is the stuff where if you only pay attention to right-wing media, they will not tell you, is that Donald Trump and his Republican-led Congress, when he was in his first term, are the people that funded this with a law, and they're the ones that asked these Christian charities to help out. They're basically like, look, we've got these flood of migrants. We need help taking care of the kids because we want to make sure that once an unaccompanied minor is on United States soil, we need to verify that that kid does not get placed with someone that is going to abuse them, that is going to traffic them, that is going to use them for slave labor or something. We need to make sure they're getting to relatives, which means we have to do fingerprinting, which means we have to find relatives. It takes a while. We need a place for these kids to live so that they don't have to be in the cages that we saw pictures of right on the border, which those cage pictures from the first administration were actually from Obama's administration, and they used them against Trump. Again, you can't pay attention to anyone without looking in a little bit further. Why lie when the truth is bad enough? I don't understand. But Donald Trump and Republicans and overwhelming bipartisan support said, yes, it would be a good thing if some of these Christian charities could help us out. So we will give them some money. By the way, they're not making money off this. This is a thing where they're actually losing money. They're putting more money per kid than they get from the federal government. So this is still a charity for sure. They just did what they were asked. And now they're being blamed for the migration crisis, which is ridiculous. Just because we had a flood of immigrants and we needed someone to help take care of specifically the kids, because I think that, morally, we have to agree with that, right? If you're under the age of 18, you're an unaccompanied minor here, it's now the United States' responsibility to make sure that you are taken care of in one way or another. We got to get you with family, but we need to confirm their family. Maybe we need to get you back to your home country, but that's going to take a second, especially when they're not from Mexico, for example, if they're from India or if they're from Afghanistan or Syria or these places where people are fleeing to. And by the way, there's another thing where on the right, we often say, well, we just want people to go about it the legal way. Well, refugees from other countries are doing it the legal way. They're applying for refugee status. They're waiting in those countries, like in Afghanistan, for example, where the Taliban will probably they're trying to figure out who worked with the United States while we were in Afghanistan, and they're trying to round those people up and kill those people that helped the United States in Afghanistan. Those people are seeking refugee status in the United States. We then approve it. We then fly them over here, and then we take care of those people. And that's some of these Christian charities, too. They're helping with these kind of placement and jobs and things like that. So that is the legal way that we do it. That is legal immigration. And that's like, these people are vetted by the US government, and we are just abandoning that. So we're already we're blanket. Donald Trump's administration is already saying blanket, hey, all these refugees that were approved, you're not approved anymore. You can't come here. So there are people that were approved that were waiting to come here. They can't anymore. The people that are here that are working with these Christian charities, that funding is dried up. We're not going to give you that money anymore because it could be corrupt. You guys could be causing it, whatever. We are not, if you support that, I don't know another way to put this. I think if your immigration stance is that we shouldn't allow any refugees, I have a major disagreement with that. I think you're also probably just racist. Frankly, if someone can't admit the problem is the color of the skin of the people that are coming from these countries, because that does seem to be the case. I don't remember hearing anyone complaining about, like, it's just, I don't know, it bothers me because I don't want to accuse people of being racist because I think it's the lowest form of shutting down an argument, but I can't figure out another reason why you would say, Donald, we don't want Christian charities helping migrant children that came here unaccompanied, and we want to protect them from harm. That doesn't make any sense other than saying we don't care about those kids because they're from poor countries. And mostly those poor countries, we know what the people that look like that come from them are. Okay. I don't see it's morally reprehensible, and I can't find a justification for it. With kids specifically, we can have a conversation about, do we want to accept refugees? I think that that vetting process should be thorough, especially when they're coming from countries like Afghanistan, Syria, places that there are legitimate people trying to flee and come here because they they need to flee the oppressive regimes that they're under, there are also people that are going to try to take advantage of that and sneak into our country to potentially harm us. So it is very important that we vet people. Again, show us where the vetting's not working right. And to be fair, there have been some whistleblowers that have shown that under the Biden administration, they were cutting corners specifically with pairing these unaccompanied minors with adults. They were not taking fingerprints all the time. They were not getting government-issued IDs from them to verify that they were who they say they were, and that they didn't have criminal records for things like child trafficking or sexual abuse and things that we say we got to protect these kids from. It was not happening under the Biden administration because they were so flooded with people coming across the border because of Biden's policies that they didn't have the resources to work through it. So they were just trying to free up beds by getting rid of these kids. And so there's a really good chance, I mean, it absolutely has to have happened, that they were being released to people that are going to abuse those children or potentially use them for slave labor or sexual trafficking and all sorts of terrible things. That's a stain on us as a country, because those kids showed up here when you're a minor and your parents. Keep in mind how bad something has to be in your country as a parent for you to potentially send your kids away with a trafficker to take them to the United States. Like, you're going to send them with a human trafficker that's at least just trying to get them to the United States. You got to pay thousands of dollars. I think it's something like $10,000 for 2 tries or 3 tries, something like that. With most of these cartel things, you're sending them on all alone without you because of the danger you think they face in your country that you live in. I mean, that's a sad situation, and we should try to do what we can to make people not have to flee those countries. That's an entire different conversation. But I think we should all be able to agree that if a child ends up here in the United States, at that point, our government has to do everything it can to make sure that kid is safe and with someone that will legitimately take care of them, or we send them back. We cannot have a situation where we're just letting people go with anyone. And this is true. This is so obvious that Donald Trump is more interested in burning down the system than having a good replacement for it instead. And kids are going to get hurt in this, and refugees are going to get hurt in this, and so are normal Americans. Okay? So the charities that have been doing this work because Donald Trump and Congress asked them to do it a few years ago are now being vilified and threatened and with legal situations. Okay? I don't like that. Okay, I think that's wrong. I think it proves that he doesn't really care about Americans. He cares about being vengeful towards his enemies, whether that being the enemies on the left or the people that just say no to him or whatever. It's clear that he is more interested in vengeance and retribution than he is on helping the people that got him elected. So that's the second problem that I have with him. Now, the third problem is that he doesn't care about our allies. I think this is also painfully obvious because of this last week's developments in the war in Ukraine with Russia. So brief catch up on that is that so far, and this is all still sort of developing, but the nuts and bolts of the story is that Donald Trump sends Marco Rubio, JD Vance over to Europe, and they're going to start negotiating this peace deal, right, between Russia and Ukraine potentially. So they meet in Saudi Arabia, neutral location, I guess. That's just what we do. I don't know why we picked Saudi Arabia necessarily, but Russia and us are there, but not Ukraine. So they don't invite Ukraine to come to the negotiating table to talk about how do we end this conflict. So also, to catch you way back up, in case you don't remember, Ukraine did not start this war. Despite what Putin apologists say or Russian propaganda says, and this is pervasive in the MAGA world, you're going to hear a few things about Ukraine. You're going to hear that Ukraine started this because they provoked Russia into invading them because they wanted to join NATO. Absolute lunacy. This was entirely Putin's. Putin chose to invade Ukraine multiple times. He did it in 2008, did it in 2014, did it again so this has happened multiple times. And every time we don't really do anything about it. So it happened under Bush. It happened under Obama. Trump is correct to note that it did not happen under his first term, but then in Biden's term, we have the invasion of Ukraine, the full-on war that's going on now. Okay, it was just these little territorial regions first in Crimea, in Donbass, and then this is full-on assault on Kiev and trying to take over the whole country. Ukraine is a sovereign nation. In the 90s, after the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union started breaking up. These countries wanted independence. Ukraine wanted independence from Russia. They got independence. In the 90s, we had a treaty with them that said, hey, look, we don't really love all these little fractures of the Soviet Union all having nuclear weapons. We think that's potentially dangerous. So what if you give up your nuclear weapons? We will defend you if Russia ever invades you. That's the deal we made with them in the 90s. And we said, we will support you if Russia tries to invade you, but we want you to get rid of your nukes. And they said, yes. So that seems like that's America's word, right? We're saying we're going to back you. We have not done that. We didn't do that under George W. Bush when they invaded, I think, and then we did not do that under Obama, and we didn't do it under Biden to the full degree. Even though Ukraine has gotten a lot of support from us, I would argue that it's not been the kind of support that America should give to their allies. I think that we should back people 100% if we say we're going to, period. End of story. People should be scared of escalating with us, not us escalating with them. That's my opinion of it. So Russia goes into Ukraine, starts this war, is brutally savaging citizens. This is not, they are bombing hospitals. They are going into areas, blowing them up, forcing people out, sometimes dragging those kids, like they're kidnapping kids, taking them into Russia. They're replacing the Ukrainians in these areas they control with Russians and then selling the real estate and basically trying to piecemeal make Ukraine Russian, okay? And another thing you'll hear from the MAGA right is, well, they speak the same language. I mean, they're the same country. They shouldn't be well, that's ridiculous. We speak the same language as Canada. Mexico speaks the same language as Cuba and Spain. Does that mean they should be the same country? That one of them has the right to go into the other sovereign nation and attack them and try to take over their territory? No, that's a ridiculous notion. It's so easily blow upable. But again, most people on the right that follow Donald Trump in this MAGA world have never heard these other arguments against it. So yeah, Russia goes into Ukraine. So trying to negotiate a peace deal with only Russia. By the way, the United States has also said they're basically giving up. Russia will get the territory they've already gotten. They want Ukraine to pay us back $500 billion for the $179 billion in support we gave them in raw minerals and stuff. Let's actually pull this up. There is a good graphic that I made for this. I mean, it's a screenshot. It's not really that impressive. Let's see. Okay. Where is the, let's go back to this. Hold on. Sorry, I'm still figuring this program out a lot of times. And so getting these graphics up, sometimes I don't quite get them right. Okay, here we go. The problem, this is per the Telegraph, is that the terms offered to Zelensky were tantamount to loan sharking. In return for the $175 billion in support we've given, the White House is demanding the equivalent of $500 billion in mineral rights, access to ports, control over infrastructure, the U.S. economic colonization of Ukraine in legal perpetuity, in short. And so that, by the way, goes on to say, this is a burden of reparations that cannot possibly be achieved, and compared it unfavorably to the penalties paid by the Axis powers after World War II, and even to the notoriously draconian burden placed on Germany after World War I. They're saying that what the United States is saying the Ukraine is going to have to do as part of this peace deal is the equivalent of what we did to the Axis powers, the bad guys in World War II and Germany after World War I. Both were the aggressors. So we're punishing the person who was the country that was invaded. We are punishing them as if they are the ones that invaded. This is so clearly not what we want out of foreign policy. No one is ever going to believe us again because of this. No one will ever take our word to mean anything. And the reason I think that is so dangerous is because not that Russia is the problem that we really need to worry about, although we do need to worry about them, but China is a problem. China is going to learn from everything we do here. And as we exit the world stage, if we really do what Donald Trump is saying he wants to do, which is basically hand Ukraine over to Russia, let's get rid of all the sanctions and stuff that we have on Russia so Russia can reset, so Russia gets richer, which also doesn't make any sense with his normal free trade stuff. He's threatening our allies in Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs, but he wants to lift the sanctions on Russia, who is an aggressive foreign power that invaded a sovereign country. Donald Trump likes authoritarianism. He's fine with Russia having its little sphere and China having its little sphere and us having our little sphere. And he thinks that those things will be like mob bosses, is a great way that Jonah Goldberg was talking about it this week, is that he grew up in sort of New York mafia land. And what he thinks of is like, well, these mob people, they have little territories and then they don't mess with each other. So you don't have a gang war. It's called a gang war because it's based off of real wars. Territory that's not what China and Russia's goals are. They don't want just a little region. They want world dominance. That's what they both want. And I think China has a better chance of getting it than Russia does. But if we just sink back and say, you know what, screw Europe, screw NATO, we're not going to defend these people, they will be forced to choose someone else to help them. And they will have to negotiate with China on their own. They will have to capitulate to China on their own. The reason NATO worked for a long time, and I think should still work, is that we were trying to prevent another world war. We were trying to prevent what happened in World War II, where we said, look, if you invade another country, if you attack a country and they're in NATO, you get all of NATO coming in behind them. And by the way, we are the only country that's ever had to call on that. After 9/11, we're the only one that said, we got attacked, you all signed this NATO thing, and that's why we had British troops, Australian troops, all these other people in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, because we were attacked. And look, you made this deal. So we haven't even had to go in and put boots on the ground for NATO countries. So I think if you abandon our allies, and we've got to think, do we want to be a country that is completely isolated and is okay with just having our little sphere of influence being basically North America, and then we're going to stay out of everything else and let China and Russia do whatever they want in the rest of the world, in Iran, for that matter, in North Korea? We're just going to let them do whatever they want. They can attack any friends of ours. This will be devastating to the United States reputation for forever. I don't see any way we get back out of this, because who's going to trust a treaty with us anymore? Look at Canada and Mexico. We signed a trade deal it was basically NAFTA 2.0, but it was just renamed so Trump could take credit for it. It was a beautiful deal. It's the best trade deal ever made. And then he starts threatening tariffs immediately, which are obviously not part of that deal. So Trump broke the agreement between Canada and Mexico, not the other two. Okay? Our trade agreements don't mean anything. Our military agreements don't mean anything. NATO, he wants to leave NATO. He says they're not paying enough. We're not going to defend those people. It doesn't matter if you think Russia's going to go into Poland or not. The point is, what would we do if they did? And Donald Trump is plainly saying, we will not defend people if Russia invades them. We don't care. It's not our fight. We don't want to do it. I think that's going to be detrimental to foreign policy. So he doesn't care about our allies. He doesn't care about American people. Doesn't care about justice. He doesn't care about law and order. He doesn't care about the Constitution. What are the silver linings? Like, what are the silver linings here? I'm really trying to say, like, nothing DOGE does will outweigh those other things. Cutting the entire USAID budget is not going to help with the debt or deficits. It's not going to help with our foreign relations. It's not going to help with the American people and working class or taxes or none of that stuff. Social Security, we're going to keep going into debt. None of this stuff affects that things. This is just vindictiveness. It is burning things down without a plan to build them back up. And look, by all means, some of these federal government institutions absolutely need to be looked at. We need some more transparency. We need to know what our money's doing. And we need to be able to, let's take a hatchet to some of it. I think the FBI might be the one that I would say absolutely needs to, like, we could burn that thing down. But I think it would be unwise to do so before you have a plan to do so. Because the FBI also just investigates crimes. You know, they investigate lots of crimes. Sex trafficking, drug trafficking, bribery, corruption, terrorism. If you just fire all of the FBI, who's going to do that job? You know, you do need to have a plan for who is going to do the federal law enforcement. Now, do we need to say maybe they can't do anti-terrorism stuff anymore? Do we need to say that they have abused their powers on spying on American citizens via like Section 702? Yeah. Do we need to, like, there need to be punishments for that. There need to be a clean out of probably the Washington headquarters of FBI. But that's not to say that every agent throughout the country is corrupt or illegally acting or politically motivated. And this desire to burn things down because they haven't worked well, I get the desire. I get it, because I think people are angry, and I think that's why we keep flipping back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, because they go, all right, your turn. Then they don't do it right, and they go, no, that's not what we wanted. We're going to try Trump again. And I think Trump thinks he has this mandate and that the people are all behind him. But some of that is already starting to change, because they go, well, he said he was going to do X, Y, and Z, and so far he's not doing any of that stuff. And I know it's only 3 weeks in, but you would need to show that you have, like, there's nothing in these executive orders, really. There's certainly no legislation that I see coming through. The only legislation he has signed is the Lake and Riley Act, which, again, I think is actually potentially more problematic than it is helpful. We don't have enough beds for detention for migrants that commit crimes. And therefore, if you require by law that someone gets detained for shoplifting, for example, that the ICE has to then detain that person, potentially deport them, you are freeing up there's only X amount of beds, and Congress didn't give any more funding for the beds or any more funding for, places for these people to be. So you're going to have to release someone, and you could release a potentially more violent criminal because of the way the law is written. So, there's some problems even with it. We need true immigration reform. We need to actually look through the bureaucracy and see what works and what doesn't. And I'm all for decentralizing that, but let's do it with a plan. And it's clear that Trump would rather just burn stuff to the ground and say things like, whatever he does, as long as it can be framed as saving the country, he's above the law. And my concern, I have two huge concerns about all three of these things, and then I will let you go. The three concerns, the concerns I have are, who's going to check Donald Trump? What is the check on his power? Constitutionally, it should be Congress and the courts to some degree, although mostly Congress. it's pretty clear that Congress doesn't want to do their jobs when it comes to this. Republicans will not go after Donald Trump, and because they have majorities, Democrats can't do it. So you have to get Republicans to consider saying, hey, what Trump is wanting to do is illegal, and that's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is for us to write legislation. So let's craft a legislation, and then we'll pass a bill that you can sign to fix the border, to fix immigration, to do tax cuts, whatever kind of thing. But you can't just go signing executive orders for everything. First of all, it's going to get turned around by the next president. Any executive order can just be undone by the next guy from the other party. So it's a foolish way to do things anyway. So I would hope that Congress would say, hey, let's make this stuff more permanent while we have majorities. But it doesn't look like Congress is willing to do that so far. I worry about that if the courts tell him no, he might just say, good, try to enforce it. Now, that hasn't happened quite yet. This is still going back and forth where judges block something and then his lawyers come back and say no, and they fight out the normal way that it's supposed to happen in the legal system. So it has not happened yet that Donald Trump has explicitly said no to the judicial branch, okay? It's not happened yet. Doesn't mean it won't. Now, like I said, I'm not going to be hair on fire about it until he does, but I think we should be looking out for that. Who is going to tell him no when that happens? Is Congress going to impeach him if he does something like that? I doubt it. But really, the real concern in all of this is if the people continue to root for this kind of behavior, then we're absolutely screwed as a country. We don't have any way back from this. It's one thing to have bad leaders. It's one thing for leaders to behave badly. It's one thing. We've had really bad presidents in the past. We've had presidents that behaved more unconstitutionally and had more disdain for the Constitution than Donald Trump does. And we survived it. So it's not that I don't think we can survive it, but I worry that this looks a lot more like it's being cheered on. This looks a lot more like half the country is willing to go along with anything Donald Trump says and does. Anything. Roughly 49% of the country will just say, yeah, it's good. We're winning. I'm fine with it. It doesn't matter if it's unconstitutional. It doesn't matter if it's illegal. It doesn't matter if it's authoritarian. It doesn't matter if it's evil. It doesn't matter if it's not taking care of children that are here on our soil. It doesn't matter if those kids go into sex slavery. That's my problem, is that if the citizens of this country just turn a blind eye or even cheer it on, I'm really worried about them cheering it on. That's what I'm worried about. Where does that leave me and potentially you, I assume, if you're listening to this? I think that we're already at a point where I can't just be the person that blindly calls, not blindly, I'm not the person that can just call balls and strikes on a lot of this stuff. Because it's really tempting to try to say, well, here's the things I like that Trump's doing and here's the things I don't like. The things that I don't like that he's doing are so wildly illegal or wildly abusive of his power or wildly authoritarian, or frankly, like I said, don't like to use the word. They're fascistic. It's very fascisty, okay? And I don't like throwing that word around because it's overused. The Hitler analogies are overused. The Democrats have called every Republican that's run for president beyond my lifetime, compared them to Hitler and Nazis and stuff. And you finally have someone that maybe has those same authoritarian tendencies that Hitler did. And it's kind of a pointless, it's like, the boy who cried wolf over and over again. The good is not outweighing the bad so far. And it's so far down the line that I can't cheer this on because just because something does line up with what I believe, I think so often Trump's going about it the wrong way. So even if I like the end of DEI, which I think is absolutely justified, the way he's doing it, I go, oh, I actually don't know that he has the capability to do that as the president. I still care about it being within the structure of the Constitution. And so I think if the normal people, let's just put people in three buckets right now. I think the country is essentially the hardcore, the MAGA and Trump people that will never, ever say anything bad about him and will go along with anything he says and will excuse anything he does, no matter what. There's that group of people. They're pretty loud. There's another group of people that on the left mostly that says we're anti everything and we're going to be hair on fire about everything and everything's a constitutional crisis and everything is illegal and everything is Hitler and everything is okay. So that's another group of people. I think there's a lot of people in the middle of that. And I think the data bears this out. We've got more independents that voted in the last election than Democrats. They didn't quite edge out Republicans, but more and more people have left these parties to say, these parties do not represent me. Doesn't look like the Democratic Party is getting their act together any better either. So I think there's a large chunk of people like me and probably like you that are kind of checking out, frankly. They might have voted in November. You might have voted in November. but you don't like drinking from the fire hose. You don't like all the drama. You don't know who to believe because one side is saying everything Donald Trump is doing is amazing, and the other side is saying it's the end of the country and end of democracy, and they're talking about the same story. And so you go, well, like, which one's true? And it's hard to know which one's true, and it's hard to find sources that will tell you the facts of what's going on. I think we can't just check out. It's not going to work out well. We can't be the people that just go along with it. And if it turns into the rest of the people are happy to be illiberal and happy to shred the Constitution, because that's essentially what we have now. You have, I think, 2/3 of the country. I think you have the liberal left that has been claiming that the founding of America was racist and that we got to tear down all the institutions. We got to burn the Constitution. We got to start over. Like, why should we pay attention and be bound to this 250-year-old document? And now the right is saying the same thing. The right used to be the people that defended the Constitution, and now they're not for free speech. Donald Trump is hammering people for free speech stuff. I don't really think Donald Trump is even that pro Second Amendment. I don't think he's pro any of the Bill of Rights. I don't think he's any pro the Constitution, and people are not disagreeing with it. They're not even trying to not talk about it. They're embracing it. So I think maybe 2/3 of the country is embracing illiberalism in a way that is going to be dangerous. And if the rest of us in the middle don't put our foot down and say, you can't do that, then I don't know who's going to. If we're just passive about it, it's going to be bad. I don't know how to do that yet. I'm still trying to figure it out because I do not want to turn into the hair on fire people that say everything is a constitutional crisis. I just think that these specific examples that have happened over the first 3 weeks of the Trump administration are, to me, pretty clearly very bad. And I don't have to exaggerate the facts to say that they're bad. I don't have to lie about what actually happened. We can have a discussion about, we want to send money to places like Ukraine to defend them against Russia. I'm happy to have that conversation, but let's be truthful about what happened. Let's be truthful about the treaty that we signed with them in the 90s. Let's be truthful about the motivations of Russia going into Ukraine. Let's be truthful about now the new thing is everyone's saying, well, Ukraine hasn't held elections. Well, their constitution says that if you declare martial law, you can't have an election during martial law, and they declare martial law. So they legally, by their constitution, aren't allowed to have elections. Also, people that have this argument with me, I go, okay, how do you think they would have an election right now? Russia is bombing any group of people. They killed 50 civilians that were at a funeral for a soldier on purpose. Like they're bombing people as they leave their houses. Where could you congregate people to have an election? And by the way, Russia controls a bunch of the Ukraine. So it'd be like the equivalent of Ukraine, 20% of the country they wouldn't be able to have included in the elections. So that would be like us only having 40 states voting in the election. That doesn't work. Okay. That's not a real election. So this is Russia propaganda that the right has totally swallowed whole. And they're just buying every word of it. And this is Tucker Carlson. This is almost every right-wing influencer. This is Donald Trump. This is J.D. Vance. They're all peddling Russian lies and Russian disinformation and Russian propaganda. And that's what it is, because it's not true. I can disprove all of it. And I'm not going to get into all the Ukraine stuff, but I will have someone on the show that is smarter than me about it. And we will talk about it. And I will lay out all the ways that MAGA and Donald Trump are lying to Americans about what's going on in Ukraine specifically. And then, but once we get the facts out, let's talk about it. Let's talk about NATO. Let's talk about these things. But I think that he's clearly just abandoning our allies and embracing dictators and authoritarians. And he's kinder to Putin and Xi Jinping and Iran. And he's kinder to all these people than our friends in Canada and Mexico. We can negotiate a better trade deal if we think we're getting screwed somehow. Let's talk about that. But you can't just... This is all about enemies and friends. And what's clear is that this isn't about right and left for him. This is about who is loyal to him and who's not, and who can do me favors and who can't. And for whatever reason, he doesn't feel like we gain anything from Ukraine, even though what I think we gain is not sending troops and our blood and treasure to defend them or someone beyond their borders, like Poland, if Russia continues past Ukraine. And plus, they're a sovereign nation that we made a deal with, that we said we'd defend you. So I think we should not go back on our word. But we can have a reasonable discussion about whether we should do that. And I'm happy to have that kind of discussion. I want to have those kind of discussions on here. But we're not having the honest conversation. And the more we check out, the more you and I just go, I don't want to deal with it. Because look, there are weeks where I go, to talk about Trump again is exhausting. I'd rather talk about like, how should we do immigration reform? Like, what do we need at the border? How can we fix the economy? How can we create more jobs? How can we lower taxes? How can we not spend as much? I want to have those kind of wonky conversations because I think they're more interesting. I just think that it's hard to ignore these really bad behaviors that Trump is doing. That's not me saying that from now on, I'm just all in on the I'm not going for Democrats all of a sudden. I think they're also still a mess. And I'm still going to keep calling them out. I'm not going bulwark on this where they just became a leg of the Democratic Party. This is basically, they're sort of the burn it all down people for all of Republicanism. And I think that you need a conservative party. I don't know how to reshape the conservative party though. I really don't. I don't know. I don't think that there's anything conservative about the Republican Party right now. I can't find what's conservative about them. If they don't care about the Constitution and the rule of law, really nothing else matters. I don't really care what your tax policy is. I don't really care what any of your other policy prescriptions are. If you don't care about the Constitution and the rule of law, I think those are primary. We have to have that. And the fact that so many people are embracing the destruction of it really concerns me. Nick Catoggio at the Dispatch, who is much more pessimistic than I am, I would say. He put it pretty well. Let me find that. Okay. In that, I mentioned the rooting for laundry kind of thing. So let me go back to this and I'll share this on my screen. At the end of this article he wrote, also really good. It's called Rooting for Laundry. It's also in the show notes. It's behind a paywall at the Dispatch, but maybe you can find a way around it or something. Or maybe they do a couple of things that are things. So he says, the effect of all this, if not the intent, is to demoralize anyone whose sense of patriotism is informed by respect for the constitutional scheme and a belief in American exceptionalism. The nationalist notion of patriotism isn't informed by either, which is a big part of why nationalists are so despicable. In the name of American greatness, they wish for the world's most powerful country to operate like some backwater basket case with a "stan" at the end of its name. And then later down he goes, this is quoting Bill Kristol from The Bulwark, but he says, America is more than its government, you might say. And that's true. That was Bill Kristol's point, I take it, when he wrote, we oppose the current administration not because we're ashamed of America, but because we're proud of America. You can hate the president and his deputies and his ideological project while loving the country and the ideals on which it was founded. America is more than its government. Is it more than its people? Whether America still deserves my patriotism depends on how Americans react to that constitutional crisis or 2 or 10 that's coming. If they side decisively with the constitutional order, then America is still more or less America. If they're ambivalent or they side with Trump, then we're in America's stand, just like the nationalists wanted. You know, that says it better than I could. I'm not a good writer. He's better than I am. But I think that's my sentiment, is that what are the people going to do in this situation? Will they react? Will Donald Trump abide by if the courts come back and tell him no? At this point, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't like to try to make predictions. And again, I'm not going to say hair on fire. This is all over, end of democracy. But I am very concerned based on so far the weaponization that he's done of the DOJ and his claiming that as long as he's trying to save the country, nothing he does is against the law. So anyway, that's it for me. Sorry about the pessimistic episode. I hope my goal, just to let you in a little bit on what I'm trying to do. I'm going to, next Tuesday, I believe, at 8 p.m. Central, I'm going to try to do a live show on YouTube. So you can go to thehomelessconservative.com. You can go to thehomelessconservative.com and you can sign up for alerts there or subscribe on YouTube. I'm going to start doing like a weekly sort of roundtable show, I think, on Tuesday nights. I'll play around with the time and the format and stuff, but the idea would be to have a couple of other people similar to me, either podcast people, politics people, writers, journalists, things like that, on a sort of roundtable show. We'll talk about what happened that week, what we think is important about that week, and what they should know about it. Because I think I need to be able to do that. And I'm too often trying to switch between, should this week's episode be newsy or should it be about some topic that I think is interesting? So I'll try to do 2 episodes a week. One will be the weekly roundtable sort of newsy one, and another one will be more of a deep dive on a specific subject like immigration or education reform or healthcare reform or those kind of things. And we'll get more into wonky, here's a big problem, how do we solve it? And because I think both of those conversations are necessary, so probably be going to 2 episodes-ish a week. So you might like one or the other. Let me know. Shoot me an email at blake@thehomelessconservative.com. I'm happy to take your advice or desires into into mind when I'm coming up with what to do. It's not that I so much want to cater the content to the audience by subject matter, but by format I do like, if that makes sense. So if you want more solo things like this, I'm happy to do it. If you like more conversations, if you like more newsy stuff, let me know. I'm happy to take that advice. That is it for me. If you can do one thing for me, rate the show wherever you listen to it. That helps a lot. Share it with a friend. But other than that, I will catch you next week and show up on maybe Tuesday. I will send out notifications on all the social media to let you know when that's happening. That's it for me.